Welcome back to another episode of the Heroic Nation podcast. In this episode, this is one of my favorite guests, easily. I'm so lucky that I'm able to access people through the internet in order to create discussions and have conversations with people. This is a guy that I heard on Andrew Huberman's podcast, the Huberman Lab, and his name is Ryan Soave. Ryan Soave is a licensed mental health counselor with nearly 2 decades of experience. He has had his own struggles and addiction and took that and created a mission in order to normalize trauma, expand how we understand it, and tell stories of resilience, right? And he does it in ways that's really, really effective and useful is probably the best way that I would put it, right? This conversation, we really go deep into what trauma looks like for first responders and military, who he also works with, right? There's a lot of co-occurring mental disorders that occur within the first responder military community. A lot of it revolves around substance abuse and substance misuse and addiction, okay? So really, really cool stuff with that. I'm trying to think, it was just so cool to talk to somebody that is in circles with Andrew Huberman and Brian Mackenzie and Rob Wilson and all the guys that I've had on this podcast. It's just really, really cool stuff. I'm very, very grateful for it. So this is a great dive into a lot of the work that we do as first responders and how mental health is a continuing process, right? It's not just are you good or you not good? It's a continuum, and you have to keep learning and you have to keep looking at different perspectives. And that's why there's no one solid view of this is PTSD. This is how you deal with post-trauma, right? This is how you deal with stress. This is you have to look at it from multiple different angles. And when I heard Ryan on the Huberman Lab, that's where it was I gotta talk to this dude. Something about it just really resonated with me, and I hope this does for you too. So check it out and let me know what you think. Until then, live the road. I'm great. How are you doing?
Pretty good.
I really appreciate jumping on with me. This is awesome.
Cool. Yeah, I'm glad to be here.
I'm such a hack with it. I'm trying to piece it together. I just think it's fun to have conversations and bully my way into circles that I probably have no business having conversations with. So,
right, I do that myself. So I ended up on Andrew Huberman's show.
Well, that's where I heard you. Do you have a personal relationship with him?
Yeah, I've known him for a while. I mean, he didn't have me on just because of that. He'd asked me for a little bit and we just never could make the timing work. I've known him since before he was what he is now.
Yeah.
We met through a group in 2016, I think. And then I ended up doing some stuff with his lab. I was helping him with some, they were studying fear and trauma and stress, and I helped with that. And then we just part of that was, it was like a virtual reality thing. And we went on this trip together to film these great white sharks. They were filming them in 3D underwater virtual reality outside of the cage. And I did not go outside of the cage. I had a permit too, but the other guys it was Andrew, an ex-Navy SEAL, Brian Mackenzie, who's a breathwork fitness guy.
Yeah, I've worked with Brian. Yeah.
Yeah, Brian was on that trip. And let's see who else. Then these crazy South Africans that these great, we were 250 miles off the coast of Mexico on this boat, and there were great white sharks everywhere.
Yeah.
And they're bigger than you think. It's like being next to a Toyota Prius that can eat you.
Yeah. I remember when I did some breath training with Brian years ago, and
when he was still with Laird.
Yeah, I think he was still doing some of the XPT stuff.
XPT.
Yeah. So that was where I got some of the exposure to the Wim Hof stuff, and then he talked about some of his swimming with sharks and maintaining nervous system regulation, or those things are going to freak out and eat you.
Yeah, that was the trip. I blamed it on my wife that I couldn't get outside the cage, but I just didn't want to go outside the cage. I had young kids. I'm like, this is not a good idea for me to do this. Like,
Like I like all my limbs intact for my life.
yeah,
Thank you.
it's something I would like to say I had done. I don't know that I want to like actually do it.
Right.
And no, actually, I ended up helping in Andrew's lab because I've done a lot of stuff around breath work too. And
Somebody mentioned something. I was talking about Wim Hof, and they were like, "Yeah, well, have you ever noticed how out of his mind he is?"
yeah,
And they were like, "Yeah, maybe that's the effect of like 30 years of huffing oxygen." And I was like, "Well, I don't, yeah, I never thought about that."
I don't know if I want to see him if he hasn't been huffing oxygen. I don't know him, so I can't really speak to that. And I wouldn't. I know he's impacted a lot of people.
Well, cool. Well, so let's kind of start with what your background is. I mean, I've listened to that Huberman podcast probably a dozen times now,
Oh,
and
really?
oh man, it was so impactful.
Well, thank
So
you.
yeah, it was awesome. It was right up there with like I don't know if are you familiar with Rafe Kelly at all? He was on Jordan Peterson's podcast like 2 years ago.
I've heard of him.
Well, he that podcast is one I've listened to a dozen times as well, and like yours that you did with on the Huberman Lab was right up there, and like it was so cool. All I could hear was like when you talked about everything, I was like putting it in application to like where I see things with police work in my personal life, and it was really really awesome. So you just
Oh,
covered
thank you.
so many topics, but
I haven't even listened to the whole thing, and I like blacked out during it. So
well, it was awesome. So
thank you.
and
My
it,
wife woke up at like I was like nervous before it came out because I really couldn't remember. And Andrew was like, "You did a great job," and I'm like, "Yeah, you're my friend, whatever." And
right.
then it was coming out at like 5 in the morning East Coast, and she got up like right away and listened. She's like, "It's good," and I was like, "Okay, all
Good
right."
enough. But you made it very, very applicable. Sometimes you listen to like people, especially with mental health. It's like,
Yeah,
how do I apply this, and how does this fit into like real context? And
yeah,
like
okay.
just the way you spoke about even like addiction and that kind of stuff, it was a lot. Like I was able to see it and like map it onto like my life. But
Great, that's awesome.
so let's just kind of like dig into like what is your background? How did you kind of like get to where you're at?
Well, I didn't talk about this too much on that show, but I mean, I came to this career through my own struggles with addiction and alcoholism. And after I got sober, almost 18 years ago, I ended up going back to school to get a master's in counseling, and I became a licensed mental health counselor in Florida. But I have worked in and out of like treatment centers and in private practice, and I've like trained other therapists. And I might kind of, my foundational work was really working with trauma and addiction. And so kind of my mission has been to, normalize trauma, expand the definition of it, kind of help people see in a way that having trauma and having a great life is not mutually exclusive. In fact, it's part of it, and it's not a sign of weakness. It's just like everybody has experienced pain and everybody has scars, and we make it through. And there's things that we experience, especially in our formative years, that shape the way we view the world and view ourselves. And sometimes when those things are, a lot of times when they're really impactful when we're young, we then end up with kind of a fixed view of the world and how we're supposed to be in it and how we're supposed to relate to other people. And that works if you're relating to a group of people that are just like the people you were around when you grew up. But most of us are in other types of relationships, so we develop these kind of strategies to make it through as a kid. And it doesn't mean like it doesn't have to be all bad. It could just be this is the way that my family interpreted things or reacted. And we tend to either adopt or rebel against the patterns of our parents. Something that struck me over the years is when I talk about trauma and there's a kind of the field of epigenetics, which talks about generational trauma. And I'll substitute the word shaping for trauma and sometimes stress, acute stress. But I was working in China. I was doing these personal development seminars. This was after I'd become a therapist, and I was doing these workshops there. And I remember I was in the airport and I smelled something, and it was like one of the most disgusting smells I'd ever smelled. I still had a little bit of hair. It was standing up on the back of my neck. And I looked over and there was this family sitting there and they were eating out of a bag. It looked like a candy bag. And they were eating it like candy, but it was like this really strong putrid, to me, putrid smell. And it was like this dried fish. and it just looked like the most disgusting thing anybody could eat to me. And that's the way, and they were just eating it like, I would eat potato chips or popcorn. And it struck me as like, taste is informed by the area that we grow up and the people that we're around. You go to different areas of the world and there people eat different types of foods. And if taste is influenced by that, of course our behaviors are going to be influenced by that. And I think that we're just not to make anybody a villain or blame our histories. It's really about understanding how we're shaped in such a way that we might still be, acting out of patterns we developed earlier on, and they might be causing stress because they're not fitting the situation that we're in. So that was kind of a long way to answer your question. I became a therapist, through my own kind of, I got sober because of my own challenges, and then I really wanted to help people, and I kind of always wanted to do that in some way. I was kind of stuck between being able to make money and do something that could help people, and I never really thought of like finding a career like this, and then I did, and it's been very rewarding. I've been able to build a good life and meet interesting people and do some pretty cool things.
Yeah, sounds like it. Yeah, I think that's really important, like normalizing trauma, and that you can still have a good life. I know, like one of the things I wanted to talk to you about today was trauma as it relates to like first responders and military, because that's most of the people that listen and pay attention to my stuff. And I don't know, I don't know that anyone has really, I don't know, like laid it out in a way where it makes sense to me as far as like trauma with what we do as cops, right? Because like specifically for law enforcement, it's such a strange profession because we have 20 to 30 years of all these like micro traumas on a daily basis, and not only is it the active things that happen, like if you get into a shooting or you see a dead kid or whatever, like car wrecks, like murders, all of that. Um, that happens regularly, but what happens more often is the almost shootings, almost fights. Like I don't know how many times in a shift you go to, people that are like you want to talk about like peg sympathetic, not thinking rationally, on drugs, like all these things all at once. And it's like every time you come into something, there's a high likelihood that you're going to get into a physical confrontation, but but it doesn't. So you like your body reacts like it did, but without like the physical outlet of it actually had. Does that make sense? You know what I mean?
Yeah, it does. And I'm not a first responder. I'm not a soldier. I haven't, I wasn't a cop or a firefighter. I've worked with a lot of people. So I'm going to say some things that I've kind of noticed over the years. And it's obviously they're not true for everyone. First, kind of conceptually, even when we look at the diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder, which not everybody that experiences trauma and stress have. But if we look at the most acute, in the current diagnostic manual, it says that the person was exposed to actual or threatened death or annihilation, something like that. But the point is, it's actual or threatened. That's the DSM-5, the fifth version of the diagnostic manual. In the fourth version, it said real or perceived. Both of them are like, if it's actually happening, we might have a response and a stress response. Really, a stress response is, when we're talking about this, is going into what we would call the sympathetic part of the nervous system, which is more the fight or flight, right? And that's just being more aware, alert, kind of ready, hyper vigilant or vigilant or even hyper vigilant. And the why I bring up the actual or threatened, real or perceived is that we're saying psychologically, if it actually happened where a person was getting hurt, they're going to have a certain psychological response. If it was threatened and they thought it was going to happen, they can have the exact same response or reaction. In fact, in law enforcement, I mean, I think it's the same in most states. You can be arrested for, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, assault or battery. And battery is I hit you, and assault is I said I was going to hit you, basically, or I'm threatening you. Is that basically correct?
Yeah, so some states have that, some states do not. Like Indiana does not have an assault charge. Michigan does. That's where I'm from.
Okay.
And like there's a simple assault, which is I'm going to kick your ass. Like, okay, that's enough for a charge. Yeah.
Right. So the point is that it's recognized in a way. And if we look at I hate to say it like this, but the quote unquote success of terrorism, it's not that this bomb went off or this building came down. It's that we think that all of them are going to come down for many, many years afterwards, right? It's the terror part of it that they're left with. So why I'm saying that is the almost stuff you're talking about, it still has somebody in the state of like readiness and alertness in a way that they might not be okay, or they might get hurt or they might have to hurt somebody, and those things have an impact over time. One of the things I've noticed with a lot of the, special forces soldiers or first responders that I've worked with, and granted, the ones that are coming to me have generally had some sort of acute response. So this doesn't encompass everybody. But when we start unraveling their history, we'll often find that they were kind of trained for the profession they're in before they were in that profession. I've met the guys that I'm like, man, I look at their history. I'm like, man, you were a soldier in your house before you were an actual soldier. Or there was such chaos that the rules of engagement, even in combat, made more sense to them than this kind of not having a rule set to play by. And then they find a profession and you get training, and in your training, you're actually trained to do the opposite of what like our instincts would do, like turning into danger, a firefighter running in to a fire, turning towards gunshots. So you're kind of going against an instinctual response, and that takes an effort and energy and a training to do so. And I often find that a lot of the men and women that I've worked with, they'll thrive more in these what everyone else might see as a chaotic or stressful environment. And then when they're not in that stressful environment, they don't know what to do. So then they end up, finding a lot of people end up finding very high adrenaline type things to even feel alive, very dangerous things up to and including, going super fast or, doing other activities like that. And then up to and including drugs and alcohol that kind of help them manage the state of their nervous system. And when you have that kind of training, it's very challenging for anybody to transition between different states of the nervous system. Like even for me, I mean, this is a very silly example. If I'm like working with people all day and they're asking me or paying me to get, to kind of challenge their thinking or work through to find things that are going to help them be better. And then I go home and it's hard for me sometimes to take that off. And now I'm talking to my wife like I'm a therapist, and she doesn't want that unless she wants it. Like, or trying to like look at my kids and go, okay, now they're not listening right now, so this is going to happen and this is going to happen, and it doesn't. So if that's happening to me as like a therapist, where it's not like a life or death high stress situation. Even if you're calm in it, it's still high stress. It's hard to take off that uniform, like even a metaphorical uniform, and like go from in 1 minute being in this actual shooting or almost shooting, and then you've got to go home, and if you've got a kid or a spouse that you're in a disagreement with or a kid that's whining, just doing the things that kids do, it can be very, very challenging to deal with because it doesn't almost in a way that the shooting or almost shooting makes more sense than this does because like this is what I'm trained for. This is what I'm oriented towards. So I don't know if that answers your question or starts to anyway.
Yeah. I think there's so many layers to like what you're stating because it's like I always look at it like mini deployments. Like every day you go to work, it's like a mini deployment. Like I was in the military, so I don't know what a full workup feels like, and then being deployed for an extended period of time. But I do know, like when I get my stuff on and I go to my quadrant that I patrol, like I treat it like I'm deploying into that, and then I have to like come out of that, and that when I come home after my shift, right? And I have to transition into different roles. And if I don't make that a very deliberate thing, then it
Yeah.
gets it gets my nervous system's completely pegged for the rest of the
Yep.
day. And what really sucks about it is like irregular shifts. You can't. There's no beginning and end, so everything just kind of blurs together. And then these friggin' cell phones, where it's like I'm trying to be a cop, I'm trying to do cop shit, and then I'll get a text about the water is shut off or like the kids broke something, and it's like, all right, so then you start to blur all these lines, and it gets overwhelming for like So many reasons.
Yeah, so before he's passed away now, but my grandfather was in World War II for 2 years and like a pretty significant unit. Had a lot of it was a lot of combat. I think a lot of those guys experienced that, but he was gone for 2 years and never talked to his family. He didn't know really what was, and then when he came home, it was probably a month on a boat to come home, right? They had to get ready. It took a while. They had a big transition because the war had ended, and then it took a long time to get the equipment and get everybody, on it and come home. Then I talked to like friends of my dad who were in Vietnam, and they weren't calling home all the time, but once in a while they could, and then they would get passes and end up in Hawaii, for a weekend. So going from being in the jungle to being in an environment where a car is backfiring or there's just a crowd and it's not really a dangerous environment, but your nervous system doesn't know how to really assimilate that. Then we fast forward to guys I've worked with that were in combat in Iraq and Afghanistan, and now I mean it's what you're saying. They've got the phone, they've got the internet, they've got FaceTime, they've got pornography, which is a whole nother issue. I mean they could actually go out and be in combat like you're talking about and come back and then be talking about the bill that has to get paid or the water that got shut off or something. It's a very, I mean, and that from World War II of being gone for 2 years, I'm not, and then to this, you're like not really even gone in a way.
Yeah.
That's very disorienting. And then how you're talking about it, it's like you're just doing this in the middle of the day in your home, in your town.
Right. Yeah.
And then maybe have to go out to dinner with your family and drive by the place that you just had to do something that was challenging. So like, where are we oriented? Where are you oriented in time and space and in the world? And like what you talked about, without some sort of deliberate action to kind of move through that and re-engage, even doing that is very hard. Because the other part is you don't want to like work in a way to reduce the level of hypervigilance that you can go into like that, because that can make you ineffective at your job. Like you don't, I mean, I say this about surgeons, like if there's a surgeon, I don't really want him emotionally connected to me in that moment.
Right.
Like if he's got to save my life, I want him to see me like a piece of meat and a paycheck. Like that's what I want. I want him to get it done and do a good job. I don't want him worried about how I'm going to feel, and I want him to save my life. But if he has to do that day in and day out, and then like, how does that impact him when he goes home? Like, how does he stop from being emotionally cut off, invulnerable, and then be vulnerable with his family? It's very, very hard to do. And that can create a disorientation. That's a very similar thing. Like, you can't, I would imagine, and guys that I've talked to, you can't like, you want to have empathy for people, but you also have to be on guard and unfortunately or fortunately think of the worst possible scenario that can happen, because often that's what you're not sent to when people are getting along. They're just
Right.
not like, hey, so and so's doing a group hug, can you guys go monitor
Yeah.
it?
Right. Yeah.
It doesn't work that way, right? You're getting thrown in, and then like I said, it's in your home and or hometown and around you, and so it can become very, very confusing. When I say confusing, it's more like disorienting to the nervous system, because how do you turn that on and off? I mean, we see with athletes too, in a different way. I mean, you ask in a way, you're asking a football player to go against what the nervous system does. You're running into people, you're acting out of like, you're trying to hit other people, you're kind of fighting and then you go, okay, you're off the field and you guys should just be totally calm. Well, it's hard to do that. You have a training that sets it up. And the thing that when I was talking in the beginning about like childhood trauma, is just our childhood is a training. So what were we trained to be like? If you don't, people don't like the word trauma, we can take that away. What's the ways in which we were trained, and now we're, to use your words, deployed into life. Does the training we had match the situations that we're in?
Yeah. Yeah. So staying with training for a second, and nervous system, regulation and, like sensitization or desensitization of stress or distress, with law enforcement training, a lot of, here's what I'm seeing from newer cops on the street, and maybe this is me just getting older, where I'm like back in my day, so but I see a lot of young cops that are afraid. And they're afraid for many, many reasons. One, the stuff we do is scary, and it's like, very physically threatening. Um, but also, like, you make the right decision, wrong decision, whatever, on the back end, there's consequences that you don't have control over. So there's a lot of fear over that, fear over, perception and politics. But I also think that there is a disconnect with how we train, because we train new cops in the academy to, like, everything is very sympathetic. Everything is a tactical problem to fix, everything. And when we get on the street, it's not always that. Like, you have to be very, um, like, aware of what problems to fix when you show up on a scene. Like, is it a tactical problem? Do I have to, like, preserve life, or is this something different? And I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if you have the answers to this or any suggestions, but or thoughts on, like, having such a sympathetic training schedule for police recruits.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know enough about the training to say too much about it, but I think I can say that I mean, I can imagine it being a really big challenge because there's probably, and I've been around cops when they've had to do this. There's situations where you need to be disarming, and especially when we run into, it's a nonviolent kind of mental health type of situation where a sympathetic kind of response to that is just going to make it worse often. Um, and at the same time, having to be on edge and kind of maybe not on edge is the right thing, but at alert to in case anything, goes in the way that you don't want it to go. Um, I think that training overall, when I would work with, especially like special forces guys, it seems even in just regular military training, it seems to me that it's really more of a nervous system training than anything else. I mean, someone could take me out to the beach here where I live and I guess over time teach me how to be a really great marksman, to be able to shoot, clean a weapon and fire it as well as anybody else. But I am doing it on the beach where it's like super nice and calm. If someone shot at me, I'd probably, crap my pants and drop my gun and run away. Like the training is more about like, how do I like, I'd be a terrible soldier. I'd be a great shot with as a terrible soldier, right? And I think, there's so to take that forward, like my nervous system isn't trained for that. I would imagine some of the training, and again, you can speak to this, might still be this training you went through, and there might not be the nervous system training to what's the fallout afterwards, to what's going to be shown on social media or what's going to be videoed or what's the body camera going to say, like, because anybody can look at a situation, I would imagine that you guys are in, and you could look back at it. I mean, I could do this even in my line of work. I go back and say, yeah, there's 20 different ways I could have said that. And
Right.
today it worked. And today I said this thing and it worked and I'm a hero for this family. And the next day I say it and it doesn't work and they want to fire me,
Right.
So I would imagine that's the same way. So how do you deal with the settling of the nervous system afterwards, And that's where I think there's a lot of parasympathetic to be able to kind of learn how to relax and build capacity to be able to experience what the fallout is, if anything.
Yeah, I think there's a whole lot to that, especially when you start talking about, like, SWAT team guys, really aggressive cops, higher drive, I guess. Like, we know how to go hard, but we don't really ever take the time to calm down. So there's a lot of training that should go into that, because, like, your sympathetic state should be very short and brief. It should activate on the job so that you can take care of a problem and then establish, do I need to keep it here or not? Right. And then be able to harness it and bring it back down to what matches the situation.
Yeah, I haven't seen studies that show this, and there may be that because I haven't seen them, I haven't. But I will often see that like it seems to me it's almost like the nervous system can get flipped upside down, especially for the type of folks you're talking about, because they're trained to be in high stress sympathetic states, but their bodies remain in a calm state. So like normally if you're in a real fight or flight type of situation, your heart rate's going to be up, right? Your adrenaline's, everything's going to be off the charts. But then I meet a sniper who was trained to sit in a position in a extremely hyper vigilant state for hours or days, and his heart rate's 40.
Right. Yeah.
Like it's almost like it doesn't match up, and the training works because they have to be able to do that because he couldn't sit there in that heightened sustained level of sympathetic charge for that long. But you're hyper vigilant while kind of relaxed, and I don't know what that does over time. Totally.
Yeah. I think, yeah, that population, right? We're talking about the individuals with hard skills that are very, very good. You know what I mean? Very
Right.
good. So that's one aspect, and then the other side of the coin is kind of like, the population of law enforcement, first responders, especially that don't train, that are out of shape, and like we've all seen them. And then you add the fact that they're terrified because they don't have the hard skills, and they're terrified because the situation is they need them and they don't have them. And it's like pulling a lever every day as to, like, am I going to need it today and I don't have it? Am I going to need it today and I don't have it? Like, I train all the time and I'm still thinking about this stuff. I can't imagine what it would be like if I didn't train for the hard skills.
Yeah. I don't think I'd ever really thought of it like that. So being able to, even the folks who have it and are ready for it all the time, it can be challenging to think about it a lot, but the ones that don't have it and think they're going to need it, and there's just a lot of uncertainty, and then you're in different environments. Like, where do I use this? Do I use it when I'm on the job? Do I use it when I'm off the job and with my family? I think that can be, there's a lot of disorientation in the nervous system.
So what kind of tools would you say that you could use to start to like orient better?
Well, I think, what you said is doing something deliberately. I think that a lot of our society and a lot of us at times will have this thing like we're just gonna like relax, like take some time off, and I'm gonna relax, right? I'm gonna take the edge off. Maybe someone will drink or they'll do something else, but they're gonna, not do anything today. They're gonna hang out with their family, and it's almost like relaxation is a passive activity. For what you're talking about, to like truly activate the parasympathetic nervous system, which is we can build capacity in that. It doesn't mean that the sympathetic charge is not available, but it means that as we build that capacity, we're not going to necessarily go into that sympathetic charge when it's not called for. We're going to have a better kind of responding time to look at and go, is this called for or is not? It's not just going in automatically. And it's an act, it's not a to relax is not a deactivation of the sympathetic nervous system. It's an activation of the parasympathetic nervous system. And so activation means it's not passive. So there's different practices that can be done to be able to start to activate that, and they can build on each other, on themselves over time. That's where, different forms of breath work really help. Getting into, making sure that there's good sleep. Um, you know, uh, Finding time for joy and connection and talking to others where you recognize that you're safe. One of the things that happens often with critical incident responses, people that are like therapists and stuff that are involved in those things, often with first responders, is they just want to get them talking before they leave the scene, or especially before they go home at night and sleep. Because if you there's something to it where if you experience something that's really traumatic or stressful and you go to sleep, it might not unwind quite as easily as you keep going. If you just can even talk about it, not to necessarily resolve something,
So
but
that's a really important piece to the post traumatic or traumatic like process that we go through, because I've been in and around 15 officer involved shootings in the last like 17 years, and that's the one thing that they tell you not to do after you get into an incident. They remove you from the scene, put you alone, and tell you not to talk to anybody until your union rep shows up and your lawyer shows up. And
right.
and I can tell you, that is the last thing that any cop wants to do. Like, you just had this thing that, like, statistically might never happen to you again and shouldn't have happened to you in the first place, but you just went through it and it's very surreal and it's very like, depending on how it went for you, like all the ones that I've been involved in have been very good. Like training was executed exactly how it needed to be, everything was justified and solid. And it's like, man, this just happened and I really want to like replay this with someone like right now, and it's hard because they tell you not to.
Yeah, I didn't realize that part of it. I know from a clinical standpoint, we want to get people talking, especially before they go to sleep and as soon as we can. You know, I think what's happening with that is when we can talk about it, first off, someone else can reflect back to us what they're, because, as we kind of start to process it, we start to like I had a colleague once that said the first time we retell a story is the least inaccurate. Like the more that time that goes between us and an incident or just anything, it could be something innocuous, there's more history that gets put in there and we have a perception that's different, right? That's why they'll say eyewitness testimony is, especially if more than one eyewitness, is not great, right? Because you'll have five people that saw the same thing and they have the potential of describing five different things. And it could be as simple as like 20 years ago, my family and your family went on a vacation, and I was like, "Hey, remember we went to that cabin? We were playing Scrabble," and you're like, "No, we were playing Monopoly," right? Like you remembered exactly like this, and I remembered exactly like this. We start putting our own perception and everything on it, and then we start bringing our own meaning to it. So being able to talk about it and have others kind of reflect back or just listen, but also talking is something that can help activate what is the vagus nerve, which is kind of connected to the parasympathetic nervous system. Because like if you and I are in I think if you and I are in a really high stress situation and there's a shooting happening, we don't have time to sit there and like talk. Like we're
Right.
not going to connect like that. So there's kind of the ability to be able to open up and be vulnerable sends another signal to your body going, well, if I think this is what happens anyway, it's sending another signal to your body that's going, if I can do this, I must not be in danger. Right. And if I'm not in danger, I'm safe right now. And that can like at least start to build the capacity in the container in which to process the things that you went through.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so going to sleep also, you mentioned that like sleep's a really important thing, as far as processing this and that kind of stuff. And as far as memory goes, that's interesting because like we have like most departments do now, um, a rule that like after an incident, after you get into a shooting, you have 72 hours before they even ask you to make a statement. So they want like the term is like three regular-ish sleep cycles, and then they'll go into your interviews. So would you say that like your memory is going to be more accurate after that 72 or less?
I don't know. I mean, I think that's going to, I think I don't know what the kind of, if that sounds more like a legal kind of approach to it.
Yeah.
And kind of that does also make sense and like to kind of get down to where maybe you are more relaxed and can talk about it. But, and if it's a really traumatic thing, sometimes we can see that very clearly. I just think that over time it can be less accurate for us. I don't know if the 72 hours is that, but that might be helping you settle. And this might be different for each person and different for the event. But at least if I was working with someone as a therapist, I would want to get them kind of processing it in some way right away, because otherwise it gets like to become internally processed and we're not really great at doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, I don't know if this matters or not, but like the typical police action shooting is like between, I think the stat is like 3 and 5 seconds. So it's like this event happens and it literally takes 3 seconds. And then you are processing those 3 seconds for the rest of your life, you know?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I mean, that kind of stuff really gets stored in like the limbic part of the brain is the limbic system. And there's like really not a sense of memory there. I mean, I think, the quickest way to brain plasticity as an adult is to experience a very significant, traumatic, high stress, acute event because it can change how it can like immediately change how we view ourselves and the world. And I think that's built in a way for us to be beneficial because, it's more important for us to know, like it's more important for me to know that you're coming at me with a knife than if you're coming at me to hug me or shake my hand. We're always going to be, I mean, people say we're addicted to the bad news or um, to fear. In a way we are. I mean, it's that part of there's a part of our brain and nervous system that's just, it's basically binary. It's looking at life or death. It's like, is this safe or not safe? And we don't want that instinctual part of us to start having a debate, because the minute you start having a debate of that in an actually threatening situation, you're gone, right? So the problem, I think, for us happens when we haven't resolved some of this stuff. We live in these really high stress environments, and then we start kind of confusing. I mean, I think one of our biggest problems as humans is we'll confuse discomfort for threat and then react to discomfort as if it's threat. The problem isn't that you and I are walking across the street and a car is about to hit us. I don't want you to stop, do breath work, meditate, and be nice to me. I want you to shove me and get me out of the way. And you probably want me to do the same to you, even if it hurts. The problem is I go home and my wife says something to me that's like, that I don't want to hear. And I react to her like she's a car about to hit me.
Yeah.
And so, that gets even more kind of mixed up, I think, when you are trained for what you're trained for, because you're in actual life-threatening situations and then at home.
Yeah.
Most people aren't. Probably the most dangerous thing I did today or all week was drive my car somewhere. And that doesn't seem dangerous to me, right? If you think about it, it's like a pretty dangerous thing. We're just trusting that other people are not going to come into my lane, right? And hurtling at whatever miles an hour in this metal container. But most of us aren't experiencing actually threatening situations on a daily basis. You guys are, or you need to be prepared for them at all times.
Right. I think that boundaries are a really good thing to kind of utilize here, and then context. I mean, personally, like from my experience with personal life, professional life, is the better I get at establishing boundaries in different, and then understanding how those same boundaries are applied in different contexts. So, like on the street, I'll set boundaries of like, hey, I take somebody out of a car, for example, on a traffic stop. I need to stand at that bumper and don't move. That's my boundary. Once you violate that boundary, I'm going to put you in handcuffs, right? That's where it is. So I establish that. I tell them like, hey, this is where it is. You leave that, you step away from that. I'm going to put you in handcuffs, sit you on the curb. That's how we're going to do things. And then if they press me on it, then I do it. Now it's kind of the same in other aspects where it's like if I'm coaching football, right? I establish the same type of boundaries, but the consequences are different, and I'm going to be a little less aggressive. But the whole practice of establishing like clear boundaries of like this is how we conflict here, this is how we conflict here, this is how I talk to my wife when we get in conflict versus does that make sense?
It does. It does. And the interesting thing for me about boundaries is they work a lot. They're a lot easier to establish and keep, at least from my perspective, in transactional environments, right? So being a football coach is a transactional environment, right? There's a hierarchy. There's you're there to do a job. Of course, you're going to probably emotionally support these young men and stuff like that. But it's a transactional nature. Even in being a cop and putting the person behind having them stand at the car, right? There's a transactional nature to that. It's not an emotionally vulnerable, open relationship like you probably want to have with your wife. So I think as we get more into the emotional relationships that aren't set up to be transactional, even though we may treat them that way, that's where the boundaries need to become more and more flexible and really need to be seen more as agreements that both parties are saying yes to. And then some of those boundaries, while they need to be flexible, they're also mine to keep. Like I can't walk around my house going, my boundary is everybody needs to be quiet after 7:30. And if people aren't quiet after 7:30, I get to shut everybody in the room. I got a 17-year-old, a 6-year-old, a 3-year, and a 3-year-old. Like, it's just not going to happen, right? Or if, my boundary is I don't want to hear anybody swear, and then the 17-year-old does, and I fly off. That's just not going to. That's kind of an internal boundary for me that I can remove myself from that situation, or I can go, be quiet after that, or whatever it is. That those are more. I can't just expect the people that I'm in relationship with in that way, an emotional relationship, to maintain my boundaries for me. So I think, especially when you're in a job like you have, where you have to have these very hard boundaries, you want to take a look at, or I would recommend, and you said this, right? You said it's different in how I maintain them with my wife, but also, it could be very easy to get into this, at work, the people listen to me and I can do this. At home, probably not going to work out the same way. And if you do it like that over time, it's not going to be great. If a kid grows up in a household with a cop who treats them like, you need to be at the bumper or I'm going to handcuff you. They end up seeing me later on. It might
Right.
be compliant over, but you don't really want, like, as much as I would like my children to just, as like the internal part of me, to just be at peace, to have them be compliant. I don't really want compliant kids. I want
No.
them to test boundaries and figure things out and be innovative,
Yeah.
and that's not an easy. I was writing something about like Father's Day coming up, and like, being a parent is hard, and I think it's supposed to be hard, but it really challenges your internal, like, sense of like, I don't like to. I deal with discomfort in a different way than you do, but I deal with that all day long, and I don't want to be home dealing with it. But that's not a
Yeah.
boundary that I can expect them to have, because they're my family, they're kids, and they have their own personalities and lives, and they get in their expression.
I actually think it was Huberman's podcast. I think it was Becky Kennedy
Yeah.
discussing boundaries, and that was very eye opening too, because it was the way she phrased it. It changed my view of it, because boundary is not I'm establishing boundaries. It has to be quiet after 7:30. It was what's my reaction to your stuff. That is a boundary. It's what I can control in me and how I'm going to respond. And I took that immediately, and I was like, oh, this is just like dealing with an antisocial person on the street who's always trying to test your boundaries. Like, hey, if you want to push me on this, then this is going to be the consequence. And it's like, all right, then you get to decide. And that type of boundary setting, as much as you have to be more severe and a hard line on the street, it's kind of the same way that you set boundaries with your kids and with
Right.
your spouse and stuff like that. And just being able to do that, be like, listen, if you are not going to clean your room the way that I advised you to do as a 7-year-old, then here is going to be my action and the consequences and the certainty of what I will do. And then you get to decide. And I think that is a way that I've had to work on this, but it's like that way boundary setting is not authoritarian. It's more just like, hey, like this is how it's going to be. This is what I'm going to do if this happens.
Well, so we can look at it from this standpoint: internal boundaries and external boundaries. And the internal is what you're talking about. How am I going to react? What can I control within me? And I believe that we need to get our internal boundaries kind of in check and understand them before we can really establish external boundaries, right? So you're talking about that antisocial or bipolar person on the street, right? If your internal boundary is like, they're reminding, like, if it's not really established and you're just pissed off at them, and not really looking at it like they're just doing what they're doing and they might not be in danger, you could, I would imagine, be like, well, I'm just going to make it like they're in danger and put them in handcuffs and throw them in the car, right? Instead of looking at it and going, okay, what can I deal with here that, you tell me if that fits at all. But I mean, looking at your own emotional response first, so that that's not getting in the way of the external boundary you have to establish with them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. The only thing that I would kind of layer over top of that is I don't know, like there's different opinions on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but I kind of look at a lot of what we do as street cops, especially like we have to establish that base level
Yeah.
of safety until and if that's not in place, if
Yes.
that means there's tactical problems that need to be addressed, and then after those are established, then you can start to climb the ladder and do
Right.
different things.
I just mean you don't want somebody, I wouldn't imagine you'd want somebody coming to work as your partner or you already out of control and pissed
Yeah.
off at the world
So
because of something that happened at home, right? Because
yeah,
that's
yeah.
going to layer over everything else.
So, not to kind of jump all over the place, but this is something I've been toying with a lot lately, like kind of trying to put together as far as like de-escalation tactics. So, like a lot of times I think that we put the cart before the horse with de-escalation discussions, where it's like, well, what can I say to this person so I don't have to use force, physical force against them? And I think like a better starting point to the discussion is the issue of like co-regulation. So
Yes.
all my nervous system is going to impact yours based on where I'm at coming into a scene. And now that still means we have to deal with tactical issues first. Like that's always what we have to do, or the variables will spin out of control and then bad stuff happens. But to understand like, hey, I'm going through a divorce, or I have money issues, or my kid just got arrested, let's say. These are all things that cops have all the time. And it's like, how does that impact your nervous system? And then you go into a domestic to try to like regulate that. And it's like the conversation of co-regulation, I think, is really important.
Yeah, I mean, this is it's again, it's a different context, but you know, I've trained and been with a lot of therapists. I mean, I came up as a therapist, and then I've trained a lot, and you know, my own experience, and then working with others. You know, especially when they're young, they want to like fix the problem, whatever it is, you know, and they want to talk through it and everything like that. And I found some of the best work that we can do as therapists is just shut up and be with the person, you know, like be in the silence, kind of be there. Sometimes it's just, it's not talking to them. It's like literally, if I recognize that they're, you know, elevated, I'm going to breathe and relax my nervous system, you know, and then something arises again. And that's in the safety and comfort of a therapeutic environment and someone that's voluntarily there. So it's much different than what you're dealing with. But I think there's still the component that you're talking about, like, I mean, I think everybody can relate to. There's people in the world that you're around. You can step in an elevator and go like, "Oh, I don't want to stand next to that person," or you could be near someone and go like, "Wow, they really feel nice and safe," you know, or I like being around that person. I don't even know what it is about them, but I just like being around them. And not that what you're talking about is being liked or not liked, but if you can kind of come in knowing that you have to set the tactical safety first, as neutral as possible with everything else, you know, that tends to calm people down. And that's the co-regulation you're talking about.
Um, yeah, and I think that's a really big thing where, like the whole idea of ask, tell, make, or like just not understanding. Again, like I think this goes also back into your development of your hard skills. If you have lower hard skills, if you have less of a, I don't know jujitsu. I'm not comfortable with my firearm. Like those kind of things are gonna increase your sympathetic state going on to every scene, plus all the other stuff that you got humming in the background, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I had was talking to like an actor at one point, and like they were really good at improvising. And you know, I said that must be nice. I said something like that must be nice because you don't have to memorize a script. And he's like, no, I memorize all the script. I know the words exactly as they are. Because if I know the words exactly as they are, it actually gives me the freedom to be able to improvise. Because if I lose my place, I can just go back to the script. And I think that applies to so many things because the minute you don't know the words or what you're talking about, the training, now if you get any bit lost, you're looking for that. And then not all of you is there in that moment and present. Um, and you know, I don't know if that fits with what you're
Yeah,
saying.
no, it absolutely does, 100%. Because and that's why we see sometimes like good justifiable like legally justified shootings that it's like, well, if they were a little bit more competent with their grappling skills, it wouldn't never got there, So
Right.
they didn't know the script well enough. And then they had to jump to the end. It's like, dude, like there was a lot of other options that could have been employed here, but yeah, it's like the term lawful but awful.
Yeah, there was that book. I think it was Stealing Fire. I don't know if you read that. It was about flow
No.
states. In the beginning. They were talking. I think it was a Navy SEAL commander talking, and he was. I'm going to get this a little bit off, but he was talking about the difference between like Marine infantrymen and the Navy SEALs, and it was like the infantrymen were just taught to shoot as many bullets as possible, and the SEALs were taught to shoot as few bullets as possible.
Yeah.
Like they were more trained not to shoot. Like but they probably could shoot better than anybody else, right? But they needed to very quickly figure out and I think it goes back to like I don't know if you guys still do this, but I remember old TV shows where it's like the shooting gallery where they walk down for training and like a do they still do stuff like that? Like a
Oh,
figure comes out.
the targets. Yeah. You can edge the target and then it flips. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so like you got to determine in an instant, is it a bad guy with a gun or a grandma with a baby, right? And
Right.
if you're already going in there going, everybody's a bad guy with a gun, you've got a greater chance that, now you're not really present in that moment. Your training is about like, well, I'm neutral in my nervous system, but I know what to do if I have to do it in a second. I go in there, I probably end up, shooting at everybody and missing everybody, right? 'Cause I don't have either one of those trainings. But to be able to be as neutral and present, knowing that you have those skills available whenever you need them.
Yeah. Um, yeah. And then, going back to what you mentioned earlier, like training against what your natural behavior is and like your natural instinct to survive, there are things where it's like, I would rather be dead than make this mistake. You know what I mean? So there are things in life that are worse than death. That's for sure. Um, so that's all conversations to kind of have internally as well. Um, so kind of shifting topics a little bit because I wanted to make sure that I address this before we run out of time, and I got to take my daughter to practice here in about like 10 minutes or so. So, um, but addiction, right? I think addiction is a really interesting thing for cops. We get to see a lot of it on the street, like a lot of addiction. I swear most of stuff that I deal with, I'm on day shift now, is mental illness compounded with addiction of various things, right? And it's like, like what you mentioned about the surgeon looking at you like a piece of meat. Like he has to do that, in order to maintain like sanity in his career. And it's like good and bad that when we see people on the street, sometimes we cannot get like so emotionally invested and see them as people, because it'll burn us out in like a month, But at the same time, we can't see them as not people because then it makes us psychopaths. You know what I mean? So how would you say with you like your history of like addiction counseling and things like that, like what's a good way to keep our heads on straight dealing with so many addicts?
Um, that's a I mean, there's a big push and pull like what you just talked about there. And first off, I really appreciate you. I think that's a very vulnerable thing to say that, it's hard to look, you didn't say it like this, but it's kind of sometimes hard to look at them as people, but knowing you want to, I mean, so I think, uh, you know, the addiction is an interesting thing because I think the medical model can be taken a little, it's not that people don't have complete choice. Now, when they're fully addicted, it's almost impossible to make another, depending on what it is, to make another choice. Like their body is so uncomfortable without it that they have to get it, right? If you and even with forms of that kind of removes that, but it also doesn't mean sometimes people will think that means because it's a disease or a medical condition that then we're babying people and they don't have to take accountability for things. Those two things don't necessarily have to live in the same way. Like people still should be accountable and responsible for things that they do. And at the same time, and I think that's what happens a lot when people get into things like 12-step programs. They're going to look back at their history and understand, what were the causes and conditions and what was driving them such that they ended up continuing to make the decisions that they make. Now, again, when they're in full-blown addiction, uh, like fully physically addicted to something, it's a little bit of a different story, but most people come off of it at some point, right? Whether there's an old joke in AA that says the fastest way to get sober is punch a cop in the mouth. I'm not some, but like, you're gonna end up away from it for a bit. The real addiction comes up, like we really see the addiction when once they stop, they can't stay stopped, right? If it were just if it were not a psychological or anything else, like if it was just if the drugs were the problem, all we would have to do is send people to detox once and they'd look like, I'll never do this again. It's that you're going to see that guy that you put in jail and maybe he does sober up, and then you see him back on the street again and again and again. And that's where we kind of see that, there's um, there's something that's driving them underneath it, and understanding that they're not doing this to you or to me, because I can see that with people that come in again and again, and it can be easy for me to take it personally. Like, why do they keep doing this? Why do they keep doing this to themselves? They're not necessarily like, if they could see another way and feel another way, I believe they would. But some of these drugs are so, especially the stuff you're dealing with on the street, are so powerful, right? That it overpowers any sort of reason and logic. I don't think I'm getting to your question because I don't really know the answer of like how you do that, other than to kind of continuing to talk with each other and maybe with these people when you can, to kind of understand and view them as people, but also, treat their actions in the way that you have to treat them. I think it's good to educate yourselves. I mean, if I think I recommend this to therapists that are not in recovery themselves, and I think it'd be great for your populations too, to go to some, you can go to open A meetings. Don't go in your uniform, because there's a lot of people that might run out, but listen, you go to them and learn and see, like, there's a lot of people in there that you also might see judges and attorneys in there, right? And people who are like you can see the other side of it and see the whole, and I can't tell you how many people I've met, and because you guys I would imagine, don't get to see this that much, that were involved in terrible things, back cops, in really difficult situations with the law, and years later are sober, and they're like, and I got this DUI and this cop threw me in jail and didn't let me go, and I wish I could go find that guy and tell him thank you, because it was the best thing that could have ever happened to me.
Yeah, we never hear that. Never, 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 never. Aside from maybe, hell, I don't even know. I was involved in a hostage rescue almost 10 years ago, and I still wonder like where that kid is, Like, well, I'll never hear from that kid again. That's probably a good thing overall, but yeah, we don't hear that stuff.
But I'm telling you, I hear it a lot,
Yeah.
and
Well, that's good.
people don't people don't see it right away, because they're very in a very selfish, self-centered state. And so, going to see those or downloading some of these, there's some, speaker tapes from people in AA that you can listen to, and hearing the things that people have gone through and how they've gotten their lives back together, and see that there is hope for people, even some of the ones that you think can never make it. Now, then there are some that are really debilitated with mental health, and, it's going to be challenging to see them come out of it, but some of them do. But I think to understand that it's not a hopeless condition for everybody, I think it could be beneficial, not for you in relationship to them, but for you just to see and go, wow, it's not as ugly as I think. There is a more beautiful side to it,
Yeah.
because otherwise you're not gonna see it.
Yeah, well, and then that takes a toll on you too. If you don't see there's any light and all
Yeah.
you see is death and destruction, it just kind of wears on you.
Yeah.
But I know one thing that I try to remember, and again, this, like, I think it's just maturity, getting older, being on the job longer, is that the line between cop and criminal and sober and drunk is like it's razor thin, and that anybody can fall and anybody can make a mistake, and all of a sudden like it would be super easy to be on the other side of that. It's super easy. And I don't think cops, just by nature of us being an authority figure, I think that sometimes we lose sight of that, and then that we put ourselves up inadvertently too high on the hierarchy here, and then it's like, dude, anybody can fall. What's the arrogance before the fall?
Yeah, and listen, on a much lesser scale, I see that in it with therapists that I've worked with over the years, and I could fall into that myself. Maybe not falling into like the criminal side, but like putting yourself in a position that like I'm untouchable, like I'm the one giving this help, like I don't have the same problems, comparing myself to that when in reality I'm a human being and can, you know, I think as humans we're capable of anything, and when we forget that, it's a problem. I used to think like I don't go out and break. I barely speed. I don't think I do very often, unless it's I mean, I probably used to, but I'm not someone that goes out and breaks the law. And I thought that I was like, I remember like I'm not capable of like murder or this or that. And then I had kids, and I was like, if somebody was attacking my kid, I think there's nothing I wouldn't do. Like and if I'm capable of doing it, then I'm capable of it any other, not necessarily murder, but anything. And you never know when you might fall into those situations. And when you're living at a high level of stress, you I think one of the reasons we see a lot of alcoholism in, first responders and law enforcement and is that, alcohol is a great nervous system regulator. I mean, it falsely kind of activates the parasympathetic nervous system very quickly. I mean, people say it. They're like, I'm going to take the edge off. Like, no, a
Mhm.
banker says that. Like, I'm going to go out to happy hour and take the edge off. Like, it works.
Yeah.
It works. It just doesn't work long, and it doesn't work well.
Right. Right. I always tell, like, I've told this to my kids, I've told this to my football players, that like, you know, every bad mistake that I regret in my life, I did while drinking. Like every one of them, like without a doubt, like check, 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 all drinking. So it,
I've heard people say that a lot, where it's like every time I drank, I didn't get arrested, but every time I got arrested, I was drinking.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I mean, just to know that, and then I think a lot of cops do it to take the edge off for sure. And I took a year where I didn't drink, and I was like, I want to make it at least a year. I made it 13 months, and I was just like, I don't think I have a problem necessarily, but I want to clean up my diet for one, and I want to make sure that the things I'm doing and the people that I'm around, I wanted to be around them and doing the thing rather than the alcohol. I wanted to make sure that that wasn't affecting my decision making, because it gets real easy to be like every time I go grill a steak, I have a beer, right? So it was like these little things that started to like I start grilling a steak, and I'm like, I really want a beer right now. You know what I mean? Like, and I didn't even realize it was happening. But I mean, that's a minor example, but I think that those things unchecked can snowball.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this is a really great thing that you do to get this information out to the people you work with and your industries. I really commend you for that.
Well, I'm trying anyway, so I
Yeah.
appreciate that.
Well, and forgive me if I made any assumptions about the roles that people do. I'm just talking about like
No,
my observations and that, I'm always willing to be wrong. So
right, yeah, exactly. But I appreciate your time so much. I really do. And do you have anything that you would like to promote, or where people can find you or anything like
I
that?
mean, you can, my website is ryansuave.com. They can go there. I've got a free like email course that they can sign up for. It's really about building distress tolerance and emotional kind of regulation. It's called How to Feel Bad. So, I think and I'm working on a book that'll have some information on that'll be coming out, and soon I'll have some online courses and things like that. I'm really trying to make some of the work that I've done over the years with folks more accessible to people, and financially and by location. So they can check it out there or follow me on Instagram, and I'll put information out about that. I'm also really trying to put out just a lot of zero cost tools for people to utilize. So and yeah, that's how they can find me.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And if you don't mind, I'm gonna stop the recording. Just hang on just 2 seconds.
Yeah.
All right.